Hello friend, I am Rahat Hassan, Assistant Professor in the Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. Before going to start this particular lecture on the issue in international relation, that is global south and international relation, friends, I would like to welcome you in this particular online course on international relations in a changing world. Friends, we have discussed so far many of the issues that are related to the discipline of international relations. In that particular lecture, we will discuss about the concept of global south in world affairs or in international relations, and we will also discuss in this particular lecture about the contemporary world order and to make the IR more inclusive in nature, that we call as the concept of global IR or global international relations. So, in this particular uh, lecture on global south and international relations or global south and world politics, the whole lecture would be divided into two parts. The first lecture would deal with the concept of global south, what is global south, the meaning of global south, or how that global south and third world having the similarity and dissimilarity, and also the various theories that explain the concept of global south. In that particularly in this regard, the dependency theory, world system theory, we will discuss in detail, and the various characteristics of global south and how that global south is actually impacting or influencing the world politics in the contemporary time. And in the second lecture, we will discuss on the nature of international relations by the inclusion of the importance of global south or the importance of third world countries or the developing countries in the domain or in the discipline of international relations. And in that regard, we will see that how the international relations up to 90s or up to the end of the Second World War, how that international relations was basically dominated by the European powers or the European nation state system. And after the post colonial era, the liberation movement, nationalization movement in international relations, how that impacted the basic nature of international relations and how the international relations theories try to include the various things or the various political dynamics that emerge, the social economic dynamics and the political dynamics that emerge in the context of developing nations or the newly independent nations that we call as the third world countries, later on the developing countries. Now we called as the concept that is the concept of global south. So, how this development is actually impacting the basic nature or the basic nature of international relations in the contemporary time. So, in that regards, friends, we will see how the international theories, more particularly the international theories who are coming from the developing nations or the global south or the any international theories coming from the European nations as well, like for example Barry Boza and some other political thinkers or the international relation theories. They are trying to make that discipline, the basic nature of the discipline, more global in nature, more holistic and more inclusive in nature, by including the basic things or the basic issues or the dynamics, political economic dynamics that is there in the case of developing nations. So, how that how that's international relations become more global in nature. So, in the second class we will discuss detail over that aspect of world politics or international relations. And finally, we will make the assessment, that is the summary of the whole discussion, that is discussion on global south and international relations. So, these are the things we will do or we will discuss in this particular topic or in this particular lecture on global south and international relations or global south and world politics. So, friends, now we will discuss that the first lecture that will deal with the concept of global south in international relations or world politics. Friends, The terminology global south in international relations or in world politics is referring the countries that are located primarily in the southern hemisphere and are often characterized by a lower level of economic development compared to the countries in the global north, primarily located in the northern hemisphere. The global south includes regions such as Africa, Latin America, part of Asia. These countries often share common challenges such as poverty, underdevelopment, and limited access to resources. So, friends, this particular explanation about the global south is referring that those countries who are the countries that got independent after Second World War, they liberated from their colonial master, the European colonial master. So these countries of South Asia, including India, we can also take the example of India here also, and the various countries of Africa, Latin America. Those countries were previously colonized by the European master, and after that the process of nationalizations, the process of nationalism that appeared in this particular area or the particular region of the world, that is the Asia, Africa and Latin America. So these countries got independent from their colonial master, and these countries, their characteristics, these actually referring as a group of global south or global south in international relations or in world politics. So in that regard, friends, we can take out two important categorization of the whole world, whole nation, whole group of the nation. One is the one on the one side there is a global south, on the other side there is a global north. So the northern part of the world or the northern region of the world, the states who are located at the northern part of the world, they are the highly industrialized nations, more economically vibrant nations and more politically stable nations. So those states that are there on the global northern hemisphere, so these states called as these industrialized developed nations called as or referred as a state or the group of the global north. And these global north states, they having their own peculiar features. For example, the economic growth, high economic growth, political stability, liberal economic order, and more stable kind of governance system. So that development that they have achieved, on the basis of that they are called as the states of global north or the global north group states. On the other hand, the states constituting that global south, that actually referring those countries who are newly independent state after the end of the Second World War, and these states are basically coming from the side of the South Africa, Asia and the Latin America. The more important things that create a kind of distinction between the global south and global north is that those countries that are coming or that constitute the global south, they actually having certain peculiar characteristics, and on the basis of that characteristics we can create a kind of distinction between the nation of global south and the nation of global north. So in that way we can say, friends, that these countries often share a kind of common challenges, and that these challenges express in terms of a low level of employment, more poverty, underdevelopment and limited access to resources as well. But in that regard, a kind of limited access to resources, it is not only because, or it is not because of, the primary reason is not only that these countries not having the much limited resources, natural resources, rather these countries also do not have the technology to exploit these natural resources that these nations have. So in that, for example, we can take the example of Africa, we can also take the example of Latin America also, and Asian nations as well. So these countries having a kind of natural resources, but that natural resources were more exploited, rather exploited by the countries of the global north, that is the colonial masters of this particular global south nation. So in that regard, we can referring the term that is the brain drain, and also the the exports of the natural goods and goods and resources to the developing nations or the highly industrialized nations of the European countries, including America. So in that context, there's a kind of exploitations. We have the history of that kind of exploitation between the global south and global north, the colonialism, imperialism, and the oppression and oppressors and the oppressed nations. So in that regards, we can say we can create a kind of distinction between the developed, underdeveloped countries and the global south and global north. So friends, in that regard, we can make certain characteristics, or we can make out certain characteristics of the nations of global south. Means the common challenges these nations are facing. For for example, the one important characteristics is the geographical on the basis of geographical concept, or on the basis of geographical parameters, we can make, or we can create, or we can make out the nations of global south. So in that context, we can say that these countries, the countries of global south, that countries are actually including the states that are coming from Africa, Latin America, and part of Asia. So these particular countries, the countries have coming from or located in the geographical area of Africa, South Asia, Latin America. These countries is actually referring, or these countries actually constituting the nation of global south. Friends, the another important parameters or another important characteristics that referring the nation of global south is the economy, in the context of economy, that we call as the economic context, to explain or to make out that the nation of global south. So in that way, we can say that, friends, that typically that referring the economic context typically characterized by low level of economic development compared to the countries in the global south, global north. So friends, as we said in the introductory discussions on that particular topic, that is global south in world politics, that the global south nations, they have the peculiar, they are facing a peculiar kind of challenge, and that challenge is make it a kind of distinction between the global south and global north. In that sense, friends, we can say that these countries, the nations of global south, they actually facing a common economic problem. That economic problem less resources, or we can say that less limited access to the resources, and also these countries was economically exploited by their imperialist or the colonial master. And also these countries facing a kind of economic problem in the sense of less economic development, less economic growth, less economic sort of technology, and also having a very less kind of economic development. So the poverty, unemployment, these kind of things that are there, and that are the basic characteristics of the countries of the global south, or the developing, or nations, or the third world nations. Friends, another important criteria or important characteristics, on the basis of that we can create a distinction between global south and global north, is the shared challenges that these nations of the global south is actually facing. So friends, in that sense, we can say that the poverty, underdevelopment, limited access to resources, these are the important problems. That problems are actually exhibited by these countries of the global south. In that context also, friends, we can say that these countries also facing, or also having the shared kind of history as well. So that shared kind of history is what? That shared kind of history is their experience, their colonial experience, which means that these countries are politically ruled by their imperialist power, or the colonial power of the European nations. So we can take the example of, for example, India. We can take other examples also, that how this British Raj, or the Britishers rule India, and also ruin their economy, destroy the economy of this particular nation. So that sort of shared experience, the experience of the colonial or the imperialist kind of concept in international relations. So these third world countries, or the global south nations, are having that sort of historical background, or a kind of shared history. So that underemployment, underdevelopment, and also less access to economic resources, and also less improved sort of technology. So these are the things that actually express, or these are the things that actually characterize the concept of global south, or the nation of global south. Another important criteria, on the basis of that we can make out a kind of distinction, or we can figure out, or we can make out a point to refer that how we can define the concept of global south. So friends, in that regard, another important parameters or the characteristics is the political dynamics. As we have already mentioned that these countries having the political control for economic subjugation, that is the concept of imperialism and colonialism. In addition to that, friends, as these countries are liberated very soon after the end of the Second World War, and also there is a social economic problems that these nations are facing, and because of that reason society is fragmented, and also that there is a less kind of governance system they are known to. So because of that reason we can say that a kind of governance problems, political instability, these are the things that are also making a sense of the concept of global south. So these countries having these sort of problems. Another important criteria, on the basis of that we can create a kind of distinction, or we can define the concept of global south, is the solidarity movement. So in that sense we can say that they engage in a solidarity movement and alliances to address issues such as human rights violations, economic exploitation and social injustice on a global scale. Friends, as we know that, and we also have already discussed about that, these nations having the common history of rule by the European masters or the European colonial masters. So, and there is a kind of, in the process of imperialism and colonialism, and also the foreign government in that particular state, or the particular state that constitute the concept of global south. So because of that reason these nations also faced a kind of violation of the human rights, economic exploitation, social injustice and discrimination, social, political and economic discretions by their colonial masters. So because of these reasons these nations also stood for, after getting independence from their colonial masters, that these nations commonly, or these nations collectively engage or raise their voice at the international level, that against the violation of human rights, against the economic exploitations done by the states of the global north, or the nations of the global north, that is the industrialized nations or the European nations, and also the social, any sort of social injustice, or a kind of ethnic cleavages, or any sort of violations of the human rights of the people living in any part of the world. So because of that reason, because of the historical historical experience, bad experience rather I would say. So because of that reason these countries is actually stood for collectively at the international level against a kind of violation of human rights and economic exploitation, or any sort of political, economic or social injustice happening in any part of the world. So these countries collectively raise their voice at the international platform, maybe the United Nations or any multilateral organization. So these nations is actually referring, or these nations is actually raised collectively voice against these sort of human values. So that solidarity movement on the part of the group of the nations is actually referring the nations of the global south. Friends, in that regard these are the important characteristics. On the basis of that we can make a sense of the concept of global south. So friends, in nutshell we can say that the global south, the nations of the global south is actually referring those nations that are coming from the, or having the geographical locations of the south of the Africa, Asia and the Latin American nation. So that the nations that are fall under the category of southern hemisphere, these countries is actually referring the nations of global south. In addition to that, to define the concept, or to define the issue of global south or the concept of global south in international relations, friends, we can also discuss about the various characteristics or the various challenges that these nations commonly facing. So in terms of economic less development, economic exploitation in the past, less economic vibrancy, and also political instability, social instability. So these nations is actually is referring a kind of common characteristics or kind of culture, political, economic and social culture. So on the basis of that, we can create a kind of distinction between the global south and global north. So in nutshell or in summary, friends, we can make a sense that the global south are those nations, the nations the nations coming from Asia, Africa and Latin America, and global north are those countries, they are the industrialized nations, and particularly they are the European nations including America. So those nations that having the experience or that having the tendency of imperialism and colonialism in the past, and they have the economic industrialization, economic vibrancy, economic growth. On the basis of that, we can create a kind of distinction between the nation of global north and nation of global south. So friends, in that regard, one important thing that we need to create a kind of distinction, or we need to create a we need to have the clarity over that. Is there any kind of distinction between global south and third world countries or the third world nations? And also we commonly use the term developing nations. So friends, on the one side there is a nations, the group of the nations that we call as the developed nations. So that developed nation, industrialized nations having the liberal democratic model and also the economic system. So these industrialized nations having political stability and also having the dominance in the dynamics of international relations up to the end of the Second World War and also after in the Cold War period as well. So these countries we called as the concept of or the nation of global north. In the case of global south, as we have already discussed, that those nations that constitute the global south, nation of global south, they are economically less developed and also they were ruled or governed by their imperialistic or colonial powers in the past. So friends, in that way, we commonly use three terms interchangeably. One is what? One is the concept of global south, third world countries or the third world nations, and the developing nations. So friends, that concept of global south is more contemporary in nature compared to the concept of third world nation or the third world countries. So those nations that are got independence after the end of the Second World War because of that process of nationalizations happening in that part of the world. So because of that reason and many other factors as well, because of that, those countries who liberated from their colonial master just after the end of the Second World War, these countries we called as the third world countries. So in that, friends, we can take the writings of the Alfred Savé, how he categorized the three categorization or three layers of the nations in the world system or in the nation state system. The first world countries, the second world countries and the third world countries. So he referring the first world countries are those countries that having the economic development and also economic vibrancy, economic growth, high economic growth, and also having the political stability, and these countries are highly industrialized nations. So those nations that are from the European nation state system or the European countries including America also, these countries he called as the first world countries, means the liberal democratic order and also the free economic system that is based on the concept of liberalization and globalizations as well. So these countries of the European countries and America also, these countries is actually referring the first world nations. The second world nations are those nations that are coming from they are economically developed but not having the liberal democratic model and also not having the free economic system based on the concept of laissez-faire or open market system. So the totalitarian nations including former USSR and the various other countries that are coming from the West Asian nations as well. So those nations that having the economic development, high economic growth, but do not having the open market system or the open competition system of economy, and also do not having the open liberal democratic model of governance. So these countries are called as the second world countries, which these countries having the potential to shift into the first world countries, but they do not adopted the liberal democratic governance system or the democratic system. So these countries are called as the second world countries. So third world countries are these countries that is the countries of South Asia or Asia as a whole, and also the countries coming from Latin America and Africa as well. So these countries, friends, is actually referring the group of the third world nations or the third world countries, which means that these countries having certain peculiar characteristics. That characteristics is what? Having the historical experience of colonizations by the European masters or the European imperialistic power. And these countries got liberated after the end of the Second World War, and in addition to that, these countries also having certain characteristics. So that characteristics, for example, poverty, for example, underemployment or unemployment, less political development, and also less political stability, and the society is not very coherent, rather there is a fragmentation of the society. So these are the terminology, or these are the way to define or to categorize the first world nations, second world nations, and the third world nations. So the third world countries having the peculiar features or the peculiar kind of or the common sort of challenges in the international system or in the world affairs. So these countries called as the third world countries. But after that, in the initial stage, these countries are called as, and one another important things that we need to discuss, that these countries, most of these countries, they adopted the liberal democratic model, but the strength or the quality of this kind of democracy in compared to the first world society or the first world countries of the European nations or America, there is a kind of in the quality wise, there is a kind of difference between the first world countries of the democracy and the third world democracy in the third world nations. We can characterize the first world nations and the second and third world nations. So the global south terminology, the use or the terminology of global south is a more contemporary in nature, and we use that terminology because of the rise of the various third world countries. For example, the rise of China, for example, rise of Brazil, for example, rise of Japan, for example, rise of Korea, and also the Middle East or the West Asian nations, and more importantly, the rise of India as well. So because of the rise of these countries in terms of economic stability, high economic growth, and also their voice in the international system, and also having the alternative models of governance systems as well. So because of the rise of these the nation of the third world countries, the terminology that we use now is the countries of global south. So these countries are also called as the developing nations, but collectively once these countries trying to assert their voices, their point of view in the highly Eurocentric nature of international relations, so these countries are called as the nation of global south or the group of global south. So this is the genesis of the concept of global south, how global south emerged in the discourse of international relations, and how the global south is distinct from the third world countries, or what are the similarities between the third world country or the third world nations and global south, and what is the dissimilarity between global south and third world nation. So that global south is basically the extension or the rise of the various third world countries in the international affairs, and because of that reason we called as the group of global south or the nation of global south. So friends, in that way, that what are the various important reasons for the development of the global south and the basic characteristics why the global south is very important in the discourse or in the discussion of global south in international affairs or world politics. So friends, the emergence of the global south in world politics marks a significant shift in the global landscape, characterized by the several factors. So one of the important factors is the process of decolonization movement. As we discussed, friends, because of that decolonization movement following the end of the colonial rule in the mid 19th century, means after 1950s onwards, the newly independent countries in Africa, Asia and Latin America sought to assert their sovereignty and autonomy on the world stage. And this led to the formation of alliances such as non-alignment movement, which advocated for the interest of the post-colonial nations. So friends, that non-alignment movement was very important or significant kind of development that emerged after the end of the Second World War and the rise of the Cold War politics. So as friends, we know that during the Cold War period, there was a kind of ideological rivalry, ideological tussle, kind of ideological conflict between USA and USSR, and there was a two superpower, USA and former USSR. And the whole world system was divided into a kind of two block system, one led by the USA, another by the USSR. But at the same time, those countries that are coming from these third world nations that we call as the third world nations, these nations also adopted a kind of alternative kind of ideology or the alternative kind of governance system, or a group in the international system or the bloc in the international system, and that we called as the concept of non-alignment movement. So that non-alignment movement was not to join, not to align any bloc, USA or USSR, rather to have the independent voice, independent interests and independent foreign policy in the domain of international relations. So that process of the decolonization movement and the alternative voice, alternative kind of platform provided by these third world nations or the newly independent nations, that we call as the concept of decolonization movement, and that become one of the important reasons for the rise of these issue, that is the issue of global south in the world politics. Friends, another factors that we called as the economic development and industrializations. So friends, in that way, many countries in the global south have acquired kind of economic development and industrializations aiming to reduce poverty, improve living standard and achieving greater self-sufficiency. So friends, in that sense, for example, the rise of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Japan, Korea, we can take the example of the various nations that are coming from the global south, or we can call that the various these nations that having the similar characteristics. On the basis of that, we can categorize these third world nations. Now, over a period of time, these nations, more particularly in the case of China, more particularly in the case of Brazil, India, Korea and Japan also, these countries economically emerge, economically develop, and also the political stability, the economic growth that acquired by these nations. Now these nations having a position to assert their voice in the international system, and they now challenging the dominancy of the European centric international system, more particularly the United States of America, Britain and some other European countries. So the international relations up to that period, up to the period of the Cold War period, these nations, the European nations including America, they having the dominancy in the dynamics of international relations. And but because of the rise of these particular nations, for example Brazil, India, China, Russia, like that, these countries, so these countries is actually now in a position to respond, or now in a position to challenge the dominancy of the Western led or the European centric sort of international relation. So because of that economic development that happened in the part of on the part of this part of the global south nation, and the industrialization process, because of that industrialization know-how or the international industrialization development happening in that part of the world, that is the global south. Now these countries are in a position to engage themselves in the international affairs or the international system, and now they can also are in a position to challenge the dominancy or the hegemony of the West in the dynamics of international relations. So because of that reason, we can take the example for the BRICS, G20, G77. These are the various examples, the multilateral engagement of these nations. Now they are in a position to negotiate their interest in the international affair, and they also can put a challenge before these Eurocentric model or Eurocentric conception or the Eurocentric hegemony of the international system. So because of that reason, another important reason, because of that, the importance of global south we can feel, or we can make out in the discourse of international relations. The another important points I need to discuss is the regional integrations and cooperations. So because of that regional integrations and cooperations among the third world nations or the developing nations that constitute the global south, because of that reason also they are in a position to assert their voice in the international system. So in that regard, friends, the regional organizations, for example ASEAN, for example BRICS, for example G20, there are multiple examples of the multilateral engagement or the regional integrations of these nations coming from the global south. Because of that, they are in a position to assert their voice, to make their voice, to raise their voice in the international arena. Friends, now another important thing is the voice in global governance. So in that regard, friends, we can say the global south has increasingly sought to assert its voice and influence in international institutions and forums such as United Nations, World Trade Organization, WTO, and the International Monetary Funds, IMF. This includes advocating for reforms to address historical imbalances of powers and representation. So, example, if you we also heard about the democratization process in the United Nations as an institution. For example, the inclusion of the demand of the inclusion of the various nations coming from these global south, for example, India, for example, Brazil, for example, nation of South Africa. So because of that reasons, they raise their voice in the global governance system. Friends, as we know that these international organizations, for example, United Nations, it is an international organization. WTO again is an international economic sort of organization. So these are the organizations, these are the multilateral organizations, but these institutions are not inclusive in nature if you take the functional part of these organizations. So these organizations, as far as the functional participation is concerned, so these multilateral organizations are more dominated by the hegemony or the dominancy of the European powers, and more particularly the United States of America. So these nations, the nations of the global south, they demanded more democratization, more representation, and more power to engage in that particular multilateral organization or international organization, and they try to make it more global in nature by including or by asserting their point of view, by influencing the function of this particular international organization or the multilateral organization. So that also created a kind of importance of the concept of global south or the group of the nations of global south. Friends, in that regards, another important reasons or another important factors that emerge in the discourse of international relations and that help to develop and that help to make a more influential kind of engagement on the part of the global south is the South-South cooperation. So in addition to the regional sort of cooperations and also the economic development, another important factors that emerge and that make more important the concept of global south in the discourse of international relations is the concept of South-South cooperation. Friends, in that regard, we can say that South-South cooperation, which means that it is referring that the engagement, the cooperations among the nations of the third world countries or among the nations of the global south. So in that regard, friends, we can say that the recognition that South-South cooperation recognize shared kind of challenges and opportunities countries in the global south. So which means that sort of engagement in terms of knowledge sharing, engagement in terms of economic engagement, and also the transfer of technology, trade, investment, and also their cooperations in the process of sustainable development. So that cooperations among the South-South, the nations that belongs to the global south. So their cooperations, their engagement in the international system that also created a kind of importance of the concept of global south in the discourse or in the discussion of the international system or in the world politics. Another important kind of factors that make the importance of the conception of global south in the world politics is the challenges and resilience. So in that sense, friends, the progress achieved by the south, the nation of the south, that is the global south, they have there some problems of progress, problems of development, because all the nations of the global south do not having a same sort of progress. Some nations are highly progressed and having the economic growth, and that is also comparing their growth equally to the nation of the global north. So because of despite of the fact that there is an uneven sort of economic development or self-sufficiency, the countries of global south continue to face a numerous kind of challenges, including poverty, inequality, conflict, environmental degradations. But at the same time, countries in the global south have demonstrated a kind of self-sufficiency and also a kind of agency in addressing, or the platform in addressing those challenges, often through innovative approaches and collective actions. So which means that point is actually referring what? It referring a kind of development that is happening in the part of the nation of global south. But these countries also is still facing some common challenges in terms of economic less development, and also inequality, inequality, conflict, ethnic conflict, and many other similar things that are challenge, that these challenges are faced by the nation of global south. So in Africa we can say a lot of problem related to poverty, and also the ethnic sort of conflict and problems are there. But at the same time, these nations are not much dependent on the European colonial masters, or the countries of the global north. Rather, these countries having a kind of shared kind of or the mutual kind of challenges, and these countries are now in a position to engage themselves collectively to sort out these problems. So in that sense, we can say, or we can take the example of the cooperation that we call as the South-South cooperation. In addition to that, friends, why that the concept of global south emerged a kind of debate, debate in the discourse of international relations or in the world politics is the rise of the various countries of the global south in the international affairs. In that regards, friends, we can make out the economic development of or the rise of China, rise of India, rise of Brazil, rise of Korea, rise of Japan also. So these countries are basically known as or referring as the Asian tigers, and because of the rise of these countries in the international affairs, these countries are actually influencing the discourse and dynamics of international relations. So it is no more a kind of Eurocentric kind of international system or the world order. Rather, because of the rise of these countries of the global south, the dynamics or the nature of international relations more now are global in nature, and these countries are in a position to respond the hegemony and the dominancy of the European countries, including America also. So because of that reasons, we also referring these countries, the rise of China, rise of India, rise of Japan, rise of Korea, so because rise of Brazil. So because of these reasons, we also referring that the new century, that is the 21st century, belongs to Asia, the Asian century, like that sort of concept. Because of that reason, we also can make out a point that the importance of global south in the world politics or in international relations. So friends, overall, the emergence of global south in world politics represent a kind of transformative and the qualitative shift in global power dynamics, with implications for international relations, developmental cooperation, and the pursuit of the more equitable and sustainable world order, which means that the concept of global south is actually what it actually referring a kind of south-south cooperations, and the basic motive and the basic purpose of the rise of the global south, or the terminology that we use in international relations, that is global south, is actually give a kind of challenge or to respond respond of the hegemony and the dominancy of the global north in international system. So because of that reason, the rise of the various nations in the this part of the world that we call as the third world nation, because of the rise of the various nations or the countries of the global south and their cooperations, their regional cooperations, bilateral, multilateral cooperations, for example BRICS and other sort of similar organizations, these countries emerge as a powerful bloc or powerful nations, that is the nation of global south. And now because of that reason, these countries or the concept of global south is become very important debatable things or the debatable issues in the discourse or dynamics of international relations.